This is a lecture from Open Tuition. To benefit from the lecture, you should download the free lecture notes from opentuition.com. In this lecture, I'm going to work through chapter 3 of the free lecture notes for paper P2, which is target costing. And what target costing is a more recent development. You see, in the old days, when I was young, it was very much a case of, if you were making a product, if I was making desks, we'd calculate how much it was costing us to make a desk, we'd add on a profit margin, and that would determine our selling price. As simple as that. And all right, in the costings, in the old days we used absorption costing. Better now, we've been through perhaps activity-based costing. But it used to be very much calculate how much it costs to make, add on a profit margin, and that gave us a selling price. And that used to work. But these days, you know, with globalization and so much competition, the danger is, if you simply get the cost, add on a profit margin, the danger is you end up with a selling price which is more than the competition. And unless we can convince people that we've got a better product, and the danger is we're obviously not going to sell any if competitors are cheaper. Also, there's no incentive on us to try and cut costs. You know, think about it. If you have something where the cost of producing is $10, and we decide, oh, we want a 20% profit margin, or a markup rather, add on $2, and we'd have a selling price of 12. Well, if we can get away with that selling price, you know, if there wasn't the competition, then there's no real incentive to try and cut costs. If we have a policy of always just adding on 20%, you know, cut costs out on 20%, there's less markup. But anyway, what target costing does is actually a rather more sensible approach, in that we start with what's a reasonable selling price. And if you turn to the second page, it says there are the steps involved. I'll talk through them, but I'll use exercise 1 to explain the steps. So just look at exercise 1. Packard are considering whether or not to launch a new product. Sales department have determined that a realistic selling price will be $20 a unit. Perhaps they've looked at the competitors are saying 20, whatever. One way or another, we reckon we can sell at $20. We have a requirement that all products generate a gross profit of 40% of selling price. So, the way target costing works, step 1, we determine a realistic selling price. And so in this example, exercise 1, a very simple little one, it says that determine a realistic selling price is $20 a unit. So if we want to sell this product, that's what we can expect to achieve. Step 2, decide on our objective. And there's no rules here. It's up to the company to decide what our objective is in terms of profitability. But in this particular case, it says we have a requirement that all products generate a gross profit of 40% of selling price. I say there's no rule there. Every company will have its own objectives, so that's a fairly standard one. So realistically we can sell at 20. We want all our products to give us a profit of 40% of selling price. And what we do is put the two together and determine the maximum cost in order to achieve the objective. So I'm sure you could virtually do it in your head, but still, in this particular case, if the selling price is 20, we want our profit to be, what was it, 40% of selling price? And if we're going to get a selling price of, a profit of 8, it means that the maximum cost, if we're going to achieve that, is 12. If we can make this for $12 or less, then we'll achieve our objective. And that 12 is now our target cost. It's our aim, it's our target. And we've got to now see, can we make this for a cost of no more than $12? And the way we then use it is we estimate what the actual cost will be. And if it's less than 12, you know, if we get the estimated actual cost of production to be 11, no problem. We're achieving our objective. End of story. More likely, when we come to estimate and do our costings, we'll end up with a cost of more than 12. Maybe we get a cost of 13 or 14, estimated cost of production. Well, if it's higher than the target, so if it was, let's say, $13 a unit, well, the difference we call the cost gap. So if we have an estimated cost of production of 13, our target is 12, that difference of $1 is a cost gap. And what we've then got to do is look for ways of removing that gap. Now we'll discuss what sort of things we might consider in order to do that. But that's the idea of it. We've got to try and get the cost down to 12. And if it's currently appears to be more than 12, then we look to see how we can reduce it and get down to our target. Which is a great idea. It's much more sensible. Again, I said traditionally, get the cost, doesn't matter what it is, just add on a profit and then hope we can sell. Here, we start with a reasonable selling price and work backwards. What has the cost to be in order to meet our objective? Now, before we talk about ways of removing cost gap, look at the second exercise. I did say that when we decide on a profit objective, there's no rule here. Every company would have its own objectives. It's very common, particularly if we've got a whole range of products, to have an objective like the one we have there, that all our products give 40% profit. But you'll see in exercise 2, an alternative, which really in questions is just following instructions. In exercise 2, Hewlett is about to launch a new product on which it requires a pre-tax return on investment of 30%. So we want to get 30% of investment as the profit per year. Our expected sales are 40,000 units at a selling price of $67.50. And so we've got our reasonable selling price, a realistic selling price, $67.50. We've got to work out what's the maximum cost we can have in order to achieve a return on investment of 30%. A couple of ways you get the same answer, I'm not over bothered. But on the information here, the total revenue will achieve 40,000 units at $67.50, which is how much? 2.7 million. You could do this per unit, I'll do it in total for the minute. but we reckon we'll get 2.7 million. The total profit required, our objective, 30% return on investment. The investment required is 5 million. And so we want to generate a profit of at least 1.5 million. And therefore, what must the maximum cost be if we're going to achieve it? 1.2 million. But that's, remember, from sales of 40,000 units. So on a per unit basis, the maximum cost or the target cost, 1.2 million divided by 40,000 units is $30. So, you know, as I said, two different objectives in those two examples. There's no rules in exams, you follow instructions. But if we can make sure we can produce at a cost of $30 or less, then we'll achieve our objective. There is the target we're aiming for. And again, if we estimate our production costs and we get an estimate of 35 a unit, we have a cost gap. It's $5 more than target. We've yet to discuss how, but we'd look for ways of cutting the cost by that $5, the cost gap. Before we do discuss ways of cutting the cost gap, look at example 3 with me. So I will come back about closing the cost gap, but just on numbers for a minute. Exercise 3. Rollo are a car manufacturer who face intense competition from other manufacturers in their industry. They're considering production of a small hatchback car known as the Roller. Our key competitors produce a small model which is aimed at the same market. The selling price on the market average is $10,000 each, regardless of the manufacturer. Our cost of producing has been estimated at $9,750. And finally, we require a markup of 25% on all car sales. Part A, using traditional markup pricing, what's the expected selling price? Well, this is what I said right at the beginning. This is the way people used to always work. They take the cost, $9,750. They want to make a markup of 25%. Markups are always based on cost. So 25% on $9,750. $2,437.5, and therefore we'd end up with a selling price of $12,187.5. Explain what will happen if production goes ahead at this price. Well, of course, if we did go ahead at that price, we're not going to sell any because the selling price of other models, or other manufacturers, sorry, averages at 10,000. All right, maybe I'm being extreme saying we won't sell any, but it'll obviously be extremely difficult if we're charging more than the competition. And so part B, let's take a target costing approach. If we're going to match the competition and charge 10,000, then what's the maximum production cost we can afford? So let's do it. The realistic selling price, $10,000. If we want to achieve a profit, a markup of 10%. Now be careful here. I did say, so it was 25%, I did say in part A that a markup is always a percent of cost. So for every $100 cost, we'd add on a profit of 25%, and the selling price would be 125. Or looking at the other way round, if we're going to get a markup of 25%, for every 125 selling price, the profit would have to be 25. And so the profit will be 25 for every 125 selling price, which is 2,000. And therefore, the target, the maximum cost, would be 8,000. Or again, I could have written that straight down, of course. But from what I wrote here, for every 125 selling price, the cost would have to be 100. So 100 for every 125 of 10,000, which is 8,000. And that works, you know, if the cost is 8, 25% of it is 2, selling price 10. So that would be our target cost, the maximum cost we can allow if we're going to be able to sell at 10,000 and hit our profit objective. And that's more than our estimated cost of 9,750. And so we'd have a target cost gap of the excess. What was it again? 9,750 is our estimated production cost. 8,000 is the target. We've got a cost gap of 1,750. C, suggest 3 ways that Rollo could take steps to meet this cost without impacting on the quality or usefulness. Which really is why I left this, the bit above 4. It says suggestions to close the cost gap. Well, I want to apply it to this question. How might we save that 1,750? Well, a couple of obvious things you might consider. Clearly, you might look at the costs and try and reduce costs. For instance, buy cheaper materials. Maybe. But remember, we don't want to reduce the quality. Otherwise, you know, if ours are lower quality than the competitors, then we're after a lower selling price. But okay, we would look to see if we can get the materials more cheaply without reducing the quality. We'd look to see if we could get cheaper labour. But again, we've got to be careful. Obviously, our costings, we want to cut all costs. We always want to cut costs, but we don't want to impact on the quality. We want customers to still be prepared to pay 10,000. That's the important thing. However, although certainly you'd look to see if we could reduce costs. So another one, higher productivity. What I mean there is, even if we pay labour the same rate, if they could produce faster, then the labour cost per car would be lower. However, although you look for conventional ways of reducing the costs that go to make up the cost of the car, most important of all with target costing is you'd look to see if we could change the design. Or can we design out costs? And what I mean here, I've used several times the example of me being a desk maker. Suppose I make desks. And just imagine a desk, you know, if you're sat at one at the moment. It's primarily perhaps made of wood, but, you know, you've got screws everywhere. You know, maybe in one desk, because it's got wooden sides, wooden back, wooden top and everything, maybe there are 20 screws. Well, do we need all 20 screws? Maybe we could get away with only 18 screws and the desk would still be stable. And a customer won't notice, it'll look identical, it'll work in the same way, But if we could look at the design and say, well, do we really need 20 screws? No, we can have 18. It may only be a tiny saving, but it'd save us a bit of money. Or, you know, the width of the desk. Currently, it's this wide. I'm not very good at meters. 2 meters wide. Maybe if we just made it 1.9 meters wide, the customer wouldn't notice. They don't really notice that tiny bit. So they'll still pay the same price for it. But of course, reducing the size of the desk slightly, it'll save us wood, it'll save us costs. Now, there may be trivial examples. I'll perhaps give you some better ones in a minute. But this is why target costing is most often used when it's a new product. And it's part of the design process. That, you know, you design your new desk or your new car. You cost it out and find it's costing too much. You look again at the design and say, well, is there any way we could redesign it, make it a bit smaller or whatever, in a way that would save costs without affecting the customer's perception? We'd try and remove what we call non-value added features. Value added, they're features for which the customer is prepared to pay more. But if you can remove something, like now I accept a trivial example, but if we can have a few screws less and the customer doesn't notice it, you know, it wasn't adding any value. They're buying a desk that fits them and stays upright. They don't really care how many screws there are. So if we can remove bits that aren't adding value to it, we can cut costs and yet still continue to sell at the 10,000 or whatever the price was. Apple, every time they launch a new product, you know, when they first launched the iPad, it didn't have as many features as the iPad currently has. The iPhone, I think the first iPhone didn't have a camera. I'm not sure. But the first model didn't have as many features. They could have put a camera in. Oh, now they have two, a front one and a back one. At the beginning, they only had one. They could have put a second one in. They knew how to do it. But, you know, they have a target costing approach. They said, what can we sell this for? Forget what features we can put in. Take out as many features as we can that won't affect the price customers will pay. So the first model had fewer features. Gradually you get competition and things. So gradually they bring in the extra features, which they could have done from the very beginning. But it's because they take you know, we can sell it for 500. We want this % profit. How can we get the cost down? Over the page, just a couple of little chat things. There's mention over the page of Kaizen costing. It says there, it's Japanese, it means continuous improvement. So this is not the same as target costing. With target costing, it's very much focused on the original design. I think I've just said enough. Designing out costs from the very beginning. But even once we are producing, we always want to look for ways of getting the cost down. Can we produce more efficiently? Can we produce faster? And so on. And so you're continually looking for ways. And as it says, the second paragraph, it refers to cost reductions through small incremental improvements on an ongoing basis. So it's getting the staff involved very much because they're the best people to suggest ways, the workers, but to continually look to save little bits. So appreciate the distinction. It's not target costing. Because even if we've got it down to target cost in the design, obviously we're always looking for ways of getting the cost down a bit. Can we do things slightly differently? Save a few cents here, a few cents there, and over a period, of course, it builds up. Value analysis, value engineering, it fits in exactly with what I was saying. When I said about design out costs, we want to look to see what is it about our product that matters to the customer, that gives it value. And anything the customer isn't impacted by, see if we can remove and cut costs. Is there anything we can remove? Sorry, I'm posing my silly example about screws again. But is there anything we can remove which won't affect the value the customer places on it, the amount they're prepared to pay? And the distinction between the two, value analysis is when you're talking about an existing product. You know, I've got a mouse here. Is there anything in this mouse that I could, in a sense, remove, cut the cost, but wouldn't affect the customer? They'll still value it the same and pay the same. Whereas value engineering is more what I was stressing on target costs, redesigning products that we've not yet started to produce. When we talk about value, you see aspects of value, cost value. When you're looking at how much something is valuable to you, one thing you take into account obviously is how much you have to pay for it, the cost to you. Exchange value, particularly in cars for instance, how much might it be worth when you come to sell it later? You know, some cars hold the value a lot more, some drop in value a lot. Use value, how much do you actually need it? What use do you get out of it? How important is it to you? For instance, these days, a cooker in the kitchen, clearly that has use value. I think most of us need one. Whereas things like the Apple Watch, it's not something most people actually need. They don't, you know, they value it for other reasons, but it's less a question of we need it, the use value, in the same way that you need a cooker to be able to cook food. Now, which fits in nicely with esteem value, prestige. You know, certain makes of mobile phones carry, for some people, more prestige than other makes. I've got an XYZ mobile phone, you know, you've only got a PQR mobile phone. But the value people place on the esteem, the brand, the prestige. So they're all factors that affect a customer. And when we're trying to cut costs, we want to make sure we're not reducing the value the customer places on it. Function analysis, read that yourself, that's very brief, same sort of idea. Okay, so that was chapter 3, we'll leave that there.